Welcome to Small Town Big Life Podcast, coming at you from the tool shed behind Grace Fellowship Church in Avis. This week we have Ed Short with us as our guest, who is a personal friend of mine and was instrumental in getting me here to the church. And we're going to talk about church behind the scenes. A lot of stuff you don't talk about in the pulpit, not because it's too sacred, but because it's just boring and not pulpit related, but fun stuff nonetheless. We'll get started right now. Hi, Ed. How you doing?
Hey, I'm really good. It's good to be with you. I was a little shocked, though, that you said it's boring because now no one really wants to listen.
No, yeah. Now that, it's boring in the pulpit, but not boring on a podcast. So, if I did that in the pulpit, if we talked about this stuff, they'd be like, "Are you going to preach?" So Anyway, so Ed Short, so tell the listeners about yourself and your relationship with me and the church, and fill them in.
Okay. Well, I have two jobs. I'm a lead pastor at a church in York, Pennsylvania, and then I also work for Momentum Ministry Partners, which is how I connected with you. Worked with the Grace Fellowship Church in Avis to help them find the next pastor, and lo and behold, it was you.
And Drew. Here I am.
I work with a lot of pastors, trying to help them get to the next step in where they are, trying to help their churches be highly effective, because honestly, most churches aren't. Yeah,
it's tough. The world's getting darker, and the church has to shine brighter, and the challenges are getting bigger. So, for those listening, they hear me talk a lot about how every Christian should have a Paul and a Timothy, someone you learn from, someone you teach to. I would say Ed is definitely a Paul for me. Learned a lot from him and continue to do so. And some of the stuff we're going to discuss today are things we discuss on a pretty regular basis, and there's a lot of laughter involved. So I think we can drum up some of that too and give you some insight. So any place in particular you'd like to start? Or
hey,
we have notes too.
You can walk me down any path and it'll be great.
Well, okay, let's. You talked about what you do when you approach a church to assist them. What's your first question? Like if you see a church, I don't know if they don't have a pastor, if they have low attendance, or what's a broad stroke of like the biggest problem you see with a church? Is there one thing?
Yeah, there probably is. The biggest problem is no real purpose.
Really?
Which is surprising, because you'd think, okay, the church ought to know its purpose, right?
Sure.
But what churches tend to do is they run programs, and then people fall in love with those programs, and even if the program is no longer effective, they keep doing it. And that's why a lot of churches are just doing a lot of stuff, investing a lot of money, taking a lot of time, not a lot of end result.
Yeah. So, yeah, man, that's so true. I mean, every church, I think even churches that are doing well do that.
Well, I think it's why I think one of the keys to ministry is not simply vision, knowing where you're going,
right?
Which you have to know that, right?
Sure.
But also being able to assess where you are.
Right.
How effective are we really? One of the things that I'll say to a lot of pastors is everybody has junior high boy syndrome. And junior high boy syndrome is every junior high kid smells and doesn't know it. And to one degree or another, every pastor, every church leadership team has junior high boy syndrome. So that's the beauty of bringing in an outsider who can sniff around, if you would, following the analogy. See what I did there?
Yeah,
that was pretty amazing. And all of a sudden, lights go on. And they go, yeah, why are we doing that?
Yeah. Yeah, you can't smell your own funk when you're trapped in it for too long.
That's exactly right.
Yep. So, jumping at our list, I was looking at here. It says when you're talking about running programs, I guess number one is kind of related to that. It says finding dependable people who don't just volunteer but make a commitment when volunteering. Now, you and I have talked about this before, and it's a tough situation to be in because people step up and go, "I want to volunteer to help," and you're like, okay, well, just because you're volunteering, the expectations are still there for you to do this.
Right, absolutely.
But then, I think we both know that a lot of people look at it like, look, I'm doing this for free. They get this attitude like, don't expect too much. Be glad I'm here. And you're like,
well, it's really interesting because honestly, certainly not in your church, okay, but honestly, in the average church, the high school kid that works at McDonald's has more commitment to that job than the average volunteer has to doing their job in the church.
Yeah.
And that's sad.
It is sad because it's. I think there's a mentality that people look at it like my life is my job and my home, and I come to church just to fill up some spiritual gas tank once a week. When in reality, the church is where the most intimate part of who you are should govern what happens in the rest of your life, not the rest of your life making it a little side project.
Well, and what's sad is every person that you and I know is really searching for significance in life, right?
Sure.
Purpose in life. And you get that when you give your life away.
Yeah.
But we fill our lives up with so much other stuff, busy things, and then we don't have enough time. I had a guy call me on a Saturday night that's on my tech team and say, I won't be able to be there tomorrow because I have to put a roof on my shed. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, you have to put a roof on your shed tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. It just seemed a little crazy to me. Now, I'm sure he has a nice shed.
Oh, yeah.
But when Jesus is coming in second place to a shed roof,
yeah,
that's a sad thing.
And I think that's the part people don't think about. They don't think it's, this is something I'm doing for the church, the body of Christ, for Jesus. They're like, this is something the pastor asked me to do and I'm tired. And it's like, it's a bigger part of that. It's like, I think that's the part people skip over.
Well, and I think the key is really, Drew, we have to help people understand it's about faithfulness.
Yeah.
Like once you agree to do something, it's not about being faithful to you or even to the church. It's about being faithful to Jesus and saying, look, I have time, I have abilities, I have resources, and I'm going to invest those things in something that's going to matter forever and touch people's lives.
Yeah, because what you do, I was thinking about this last night. We had a meeting last night and we discussed the future of the church and vision and things like that. And you just nailed it. What you're doing when you do something for the church, you're doing something for something that's going to outlive you.
Absolutely.
And it's not just and it has legs. It moves forward. Your deeds, I mean, for the church.
Sure. Now, honestly, part of why we have a volunteer problem is on us as pastors because we recruit poorly. We tend to get up and we say, hey, we have a need in second and third grade boys' Sunday school class.
Right.
And if we don't get someone that's going to help, eventually those kids are going to prison. So we need help. And could you help us? And some poor sucker goes, all right, I don't want to see that kid going to prison, so I'll help. And they were never designed to do that job.
Yeah.
So they fill a role that A, they're not passionate about, and B, they're not very good at. And that just leads to frustration. And the kid isn't enjoying it either. So we have to make sure that we get people who understand the faithfulness issue, but then find a good fit.
Yeah, that's a lot of churches have an issue where they want to just let somebody do something out of the kindness of their heart because they really like the person, but that person may not necessarily be the one that should be doing the job, just like the example you just gave.
Exactly.
And anything I'm guilty of is being too abrasive about communicating those things sometimes, and I've had to learn to polish my language a little. I don't mean, you know what I mean.
I do.
Word choice, not necessarily. I'm not talking about profanity or anything like that. But when approaching that, but I mean, yeah, you nailed it, man. You got to find the right person for the job. Just because someone says they'll do it doesn't mean that's the person you should have do it.
And the other side of it then is, once a person is serving, you and I and the leadership team needs to constantly encourage them and thank them for serving.
Yeah. Yeah. Big time.
Because I grew up in a German home where basically it's like, hey, here's the bar. That's just what we do. You just get out there and you do it. Don't expect me to pat you on the back for just doing a regular, ordinary, normal job.
Right.
And so I sort of took that into the church with me. And all of a sudden I realized that people are discouraged and are not feeling encouraged. And I thought, well, why would I have to encourage them? They're just doing what they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
Well, I have to encourage them because people like encouragement. And, nobody's going to do a ministry because they need encouragement, at least long term.
Right.
But I think that's really important to notice someone, to send a note or a card or a text, or to just call them out of the blue and say, hey, just want to let you know I've been thinking about you and I'm praying for you and thank you so much for the investment that you're making.
Yeah, and you notice it too in ministry, because when you do get someone who does a good job, you've got, unfortunately, you have a long list of the type of people we were talking about a minute ago to compare them to. So when you get someone who comes in there and crushes it, man, you do notice it. I mean, the encouragement and the thank yous are heartfelt.
And the person that crushes it, they have another issue. You know what it is? They're going to do too much. And they just keep serving and serving and serving and serving and serving, and there's a need, and they go, well, I'll do it. And there's a need, and they go, I'll do it. And after a while, what do? They burn out.
Yeah.
And so there are times that I have to go, hey, I can't have you do that. It's sort of like in Major League Baseball, the manager will put a pitch count on the pitcher and say, you can't throw more than 100 pitches today. Even if it's the 7th inning and he's only given up 2 hits, no runs. He's still going to pull him because he's going to recognize that I might win this game, right, but it's going to hinder us down the road.
Yep. That's good. That's a good point. We had before I came here, there was a pastor from some, man, it was like a third world country, a speaker. Anyway, he said when he was out touring churches to help them, he did kind of what you do. And he went to one church and met the pastor, and the pastor was cleaning the bathrooms and the kitchen. And he said, well, you're not doing your job right if this is what you're doing. And he said, why? And he said, you shouldn't be doing this. And he said, well, I'm not above any of this. I'm not. He said, that's not what I mean. I mean, you're supposed to have the people in the church have enough value in the church that they want to help do these things. It's not that you're above them.
Right.
It's that you're not teaching the right values if you don't have people jumping in and trying to help the church. And I thought, wow, that was an interesting take on it. Because a lot of people do, in their attempt to be humble, forget that a lot of the stuff you're saying, the idea is that we are all in this together. We all take care of the church together.
Well, that's the beauty of the body of Christ, right? That you do what you do, I do what I do, she does what she does. If we all play our role, this thing works.
Yeah.
If we don't, and in the average church, the reason that they struggle is you got about 30% of the people pulling the whole church, pulling the weight.
Yeah.
And then you're going, okay, your ministry is going to max out at 30%.
Yeah.
Because God designed everybody to be doing ministry.
Yeah. That's right. And I talked to our intern here and some of the younger people. I say, listen, your job. I say my job is to make sure you do this better than I do, and your job is to make sure the next person you teach does it better than you. We have the opposite mentality of the world. We don't say, hey, I'm not going to train this guy to do better than me. I go, as a Christian, your job is to train this guy to do better than you. I go, that's our mission. So pride is completely not here, and that's part of it. When you talked about pulling the weight, financially too. And that's a tough thing. When I was in college, and our professors would always, would come up and they would say things like, well, what's your biggest struggle in ministry? And I said, mixing ministry and money. And they said, yeah, well, you're going to have to get over that because it's, but then I also know that it's a common thing to start out with, but you can't be afraid of it. And I think for me, and for a lot of folks, you see the guys on TV who are crooked. You're like, I don't ever want to be viewed that way. But then when you get into ministry, you realize this church is going to close its doors if the body doesn't come together biblically like the Bible says and do things. And when you said 30% of the folks pulling the weight, sometimes financially, churches I've been involved with, not just ones I was a pastor at, I've witnessed that. You got this small segment of the folks that tithe, and they go above and beyond. And then there's a lot of folks who aren't. Now, to be clear, I know that our job is to take care of those who can't. I get that, and I preach that, and Jesus taught that.
Right.
And but yeah, that's a tough thing to. I mean, you've got way more experience than I do. So, how do you approach that topic?
Well, I think it's a topic that I've had to grow in.
Yeah.
For that very reason that I was intimidated that people would think I'm just after their money.
Right.
And so I've learned to say a couple of things. If I'm the person that's going to get up when we do the giving section of church, I'll say, hey, if you're new today, what we're about to do is really not for you. Now, if you come back and you want to give, that's fine, but there's no pressure, no obligation. This is for folks that regularly attend Crosspoint. And when you do that, it takes off the pressure. Now, there's another side to it. I really think that most of us as pastors, we actually harm people because we don't talk about money.
Yeah.
Now, we have to talk not just about giving, but about money, the whole issue of money. I want people in my church to recognize that I'm going to help them understand that every dollar that you have is on loan from God.
You're right.
And you get to invest it. And I think you get to invest it in 3 arenas. You get to invest it in your own family. That makes sense, right?
Yep.
Take care of your family. You get to do that.
Yep.
You get to invest it in his family. That's called the church. You get to invest it in his future family. That's called unchurched people who God really loves and wants to see come into the church and be a part of that.
Yeah.
And so if I don't help people understand the opportunity and the privilege of giving, then I'm really doing them a tremendous disservice. Because most of the stuff that we have, there's a certain amount of liquid money that you have, right? I mean, whatever your income is, this much is definitely going to go to pay the mortgage, pay the electric bill, pay this, pay that, right? You can't do anything about that.
Right.
But then there's this much. And most of the time, we tend to spend the this much portion on things that maybe don't really matter a whole lot.
Right.
And so I'm saying, hey, I want to help you to understand, yes, you can have fun in life. You can buy a new car if you want to, but make sure that you're sending some of your money on ahead for something that's going to count long term.
Right.
And really seriously invest that money. And honestly, pastors tend to be guilty of the exact opposite of what we're just talking about. They think, oh, well, my ministry is being a pastor, so I don't have to give. And I look at them and go, really? Like, come on. I mean, if you're not giving, you shouldn't be leading the church. You have got to personally invest. And I want my people to know that they don't know the amount I give, but they know that I give and invest in that ministry. I want to be the first guy in. I want to model that for my people. So if we have a campaign of some kind, I'll tell people, hey, Carol and I, we prayed about this, and we're giving a chunk of change, and I'm not going to tell you the number, but I want you to know I'm not just after your money.
Right.
Okay? This is a ministry that belongs to all of us, not just me, all of us, and we are partnering with you too. We're going to give.
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of different pastors from a lot of different churches over the years, and the way they give has been very, very versatile. Not a lot of them, as many as I would think, do that to their own, tithe to their church directly. And we did a sermon called God, Man, and Work, and where I talked about money and tithing and all that stuff. That was the whole theme of the service, and touched base on that. And there's a lot of surprising viewpoints, none of which I really disagree with. Some I wouldn't do myself, but I don't. But I suppose it has to be prayerfully between the person and God as to how they do it. But that's another topic. I have a whole list of the different ways they do it. So you're all in at your own church.
I am. And now Carol and I give to other ministries.
Sure. And
we invest in that. But the primary investment we're going to make is where we get fed. And that just makes sense, right? Like, this is where I get fed. This is my family. So, yes, I'm going to invest there.
Right. Okay. All right. So, yeah, I don't want to... It's funny because I'm hearing the voice in my head going, if you spend too much time talking about money, they're going to think the whole podcast about trying to get money from the church people. But you know what, though, realistically, that's the way conversations get steered in ministry when you talk about money. You start thinking, like, behind closed doors, it's an important topic. But it's when you go into the pulpit and you interact with the congregation, you want to make sure that you're respectful of the matter. But like you said, it can't be neglected.
Right. Well, I think there's two things that you look at. If you want your people, if I want my people to assess where they are spiritually, I'm going to ask them to look at their calendars and see how much time they're investing in doing ministry, not just ministry in the church, in the building,
sure, but
out and about. Like you and I have talked about, what if 90% of the ministry of Grace Fellowship happened out there? Right. So I'm going to look at my calendar. I'm also going to look at my bank account, my checking account, and see how I'm spending my money, because those two things reveal my values. They reveal what's really important to me. And it really doesn't matter how much money you have. it's not about the dollar amount. It's about that I have had to get to the point of hanging on to my money and my time loosely.
Right.
So I'm not going to hang on to it in it with a tight fist. I'm going to have an open palm. And like one of the things that God tapped me on the shoulder about a couple of years ago, with all of the issues going on with police officers and stuff, I really felt God was saying, hey, if you're ever in a restaurant and you see a police officer eating, I want you to pick up the check.
Sure.
And so I went to this past Tuesday night. I went to the pizza place, and I'm going to get a stromboli. It was like $16.97. I see 2 police officers in there. The restaurant is empty. Me, the waitress, 2 police officers. And God's tapping me on the shoulder going, you need to do that. And so I said, hey, I'll pick that up. And so she types it in, and she goes, that'll be $57.92. And I'm thinking, I didn't really mean that.
I meant the coffee.
But I thought, hey, God knew that ahead of time, right?
Yeah.
And so I try to live on the money issue and the time issue is that my money's not mine and my time is not mine. That frees me up a lot.
That's a healthy mentality. My wife, we talk about this kind of stuff all the time, and so she brings up. I always say, "Did you save a receipt for that? Did you save a receipt for this?" And she goes, "No, I didn't," because you know what it's like.
Sure.
We spend a lot
Right.
on the church, and a lot of things we agree. Well, we're not going to turn in receipts for this, that, and the other. We don't tell people. Blah blah blah. You go down and then there's some things. I say, well, we should turn a receipt in for something, Grace. I mean, it's not unrealistic to say we shouldn't turn. So she keeps me balanced, for sure. But I think, I don't know, man. It's like it's there's the gifting. You know, the different schools of thought on gifting and tithing. Mm-hmm. 2 different things. I don't know. I mean, for people listening, if they understand that there's a difference between tithing and gifting, because some people think gifting when the plate comes around that's tithing.
So
Right.
what is the difference?
Well, it's a good point. I think a lot of us, we wind up giving tips to God.
Yeah, that's an excellent way
That's
to.
what we do. We give tips
Yeah.
to God. And it's interesting, in a lot of churches, the giving portion is after the sermon or the talk. And I'm always thinking, if I'm going to give a tip and it wasn't a very good sermon, then I'm not going to give a whole lot. It should have nothing to do with what I just got.
Right.
It should have everything to do with what God gave me, and I am now taking a portion of that and giving it back as an investment.
Yep.
And even if the church messes that part up,
It's on them.
yeah, it is. I still win.
Yeah.
You know, it's like I still took what God gave me and took a portion of that and invested that in things that ultimately matter for all of eternity. That's as big of a win as I'm going to get today.
That's true. But I'm still laughing about the whole tipping God thing. It is like that, and a lot of churches are conscious of that when they do they say, well, where do we do the collections and the gifting? Because if we don't want to do it after the sermon, because if somebody doesn't like the sermon,
Right.
they're not going to, as you put it, tip. But the difference between tithing and gifting, tithing is 10% of the income. People argue about what the Bible says on that. It's pretty clear though. And then gifting is when the plate goes around. That's like supposed to be in addition to tithing. And until you get into ministry, you think. Like when I was a kid and I would go to church and I would see that plate going around, I would picture the pastor going in the back and pouring it in a bag with a dollar sign on it and throwing it in the back of his Cadillac and driving home and then going out on his boat. And, I'm like, look at all that money. He gets all that money because, you don't, even though I was a kid, that mentality transfers to adults too.
Sure does.
And they may not be conscious of it, but
Well,
they
and
think
in
that like we
fairness-
just $68,000 for a parking lot.
Right, exactly.
And we don't even have that much money.
And
It's
nobody gets excited about paying for the parking lot,
No,
right?
no.
So what you have to help people think about is, hey, if we don't have a parking lot, people can't come here.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like if in the auditorium there aren't any seats. I doubt if we'll come and just stand. Right?
Yep.
So it's one of those things that nobody gets excited about: the parking lot, the electric bill, the water sewer bill, any of that stuff.
Yeah.
But if we don't do that, then we don't make an impact.
Right.
So we do the nuts and bolts things so we can make an impact.
Right. Yeah, if it is the church, the collective, the body of Christ, taking care of that stuff. And every church is fortunate. There's people that are able to that step up and go, you know what, I'm going to help you with this. We've had some, people do that here. I've had any church I've been to. There's been somebody that was able to do something when we were in dire straits, and they took an action. And you're like, oh, thank God for that, and literally thank God for that.
Absolutely, yeah.
and that's anyway. So yeah, it's a huge importance. I try to I bring it up in the pulpit. And once in a while I've done one sermon aimed directly at the relationship between work and money and time, and just what you said to kind of show the value of it's not just money, because our money represents our time, because we get paid for work we do, our time, and it's a whole thing. It's giving money to God is also symbolic of giving your time and your work to God. So, all right. Well, man, we got a lot of stuff on the list, but I'm glad we got to touch on that. I thought a funny thing I wrote down here. We can talk about anything you want, but I haven't had this problem yet, and I'm assuming maybe you have, because you've done this.
Well, I've had a lot of problems. So
deciding what to do with an unruly church member, and this came up because when we were writing our membership papers, the topic came up of, can you lose your membership? And then we started to explore the ideas of how could you lose your membership? And we had some laughs with that conversation. Have you ever had to approach someone and say, listen, don't come here anymore?
Yeah, sadly I have.
Okay.
And I will tell you that the average church, the issue that they tend to deal with is when there's some kind of sexual immorality.
Oh, yeah.
That it goes public. And we definitely have to help those folks walk through that. Let's be honest. There are people in your church and my church who are struggling right now.
Yep.
In sexual immorality issues. All right. So we're not going around and looking to call people out. What the purpose of interaction between a pastor or leaders or just people in general, because it's not just from the top down.
Right.
People who know the person who's on a bad path ought to really love that person enough to do what the Bible calls a confrontation. Now, confrontation sounds like it's a negative, horrible word. Like nobody wants to be confronted. Like you go, hey, I want to confront me. No, nobody wants to be. But if I have a relationship with you and you know that I love you, you know that I care about you, and I sense there's something going on in your life, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up and go something like, hey, Drew, I could be wrong about this, which is a disarming statement to make. I could be wrong about this, but it seems to me like you, and I'm fill in the blank, okay?
Or drinking in the pulpit.
Exactly, or even behind the pulpit, and that's really bad, right?
Right.
But it seems like, you have, I sense you have a negative attitude toward this. I sense that you're being really rough on your wife. I sense that, you're straying over here in this area and that area. Now, what I have to then do is say, and I want to help you with that.
Right.
See, I'm not just pointing it out.
Right.
I'm not just pointing it out like, man, you are scum and I'm not.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That's wrong, right?
Yep, exactly.
I'm going to come behind you and I'm going to go, hey, so, if I'm right on that, then I really want to help you and I will walk the path with you. If I'm wrong, you just tell me. Now, honestly, some people are going to lie to me.
Right.
They're going, oh, well, no, I'm fine. I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
Well, if it circles around again, I'm going to have another conversation. I'm going, hey, I got to tell you, pretty sure I'm not wrong here. And if I have a relationship with them and you pray hard about that, you pray that God really touches their hearts, and a vast amount of time people will be willing to go, okay, yeah, there is something going on here, and I want to work through it.
So what kind of situation were you in where you had to say, hey, I need you to, because I'm with you. I mean, our job is to help people.
Yeah, right.
And so they got a problem. We're supposed to go, hey man, let me help you out. And I get that. I preach that. But I'm wondering if you've been in a situation where someone crossed that line where you were forced to go, man, you can't come here anymore, dude.
Yeah. I'll give you a couple of arenas that most of the time I don't think we think about. The primary one is divisiveness in a church.
Yep.
And most of the time, we don't deal with that as church leaders because we're thinking, because usually if you're a divisive person, you're like the biggest, baddest bear in the woods.
Right.
And nobody really wants to address that issue with them.
Right.
And I'm thinking, you know what? We need to address that issue with them because divisiveness hurts the body of Christ far more than sexual immorality does.
Yep.
Now think about that, right?
It's huge.
You get a divisive person in the church, and they can put poison in the water, and it's really, really bad. I was working with another church where one of the guys that was heavily involved in having the former pastor fired because he said all kinds of negative stuff. And as I'm doing an assessment with this guy, he's just going on and on and on and on about how bad the church is. And I don't mind if somebody tells me in reality, hey, we're struggling with this, struggling with that, but you can tell there's an attitude here.
Yeah.
And he was the bully in the church. And it got to the point that I spoke with the elders and said, we've got to deal with that. How long has this been going on? And they look at me like, like 20 years. And I'm thinking, come on, let's deal with this. So we met with them, and we said, look, we love you, but you have got to change. If you want to, here it comes, if you want to continue to come here, and we hope that you do, if you want to continue to change, if you want to continue to come here, you got to change your attitude, which is going to flesh itself out in what you say and what you do. And we're going to hold you accountable for that. And he didn't like the conversation very well. But after he went home, he came back and he repented, had a change of thinking.
Really?
He did. And he's still in the church. And I wouldn't say he's perfect, but finally somebody called him out.
Yeah.
You know, honestly, it's what I call the bar fight principle. You go, well, that's going to be an interesting thought. Here's the bar fight principle. I've never been in a bar fight. Have you been in a bar fight? Okay, we probably shouldn't go there. Okay. So I've never been in a bar fight, but I've seen bar fights, okay, in the movies.
Right.
Here's my thought. Like, in a bar fight, at least in the movies, like, if you fight the little guy first, you got to go to the second guy, the third guy, the fourth guy, the fifth guy, until you get to King Tut down the end, right? Yeah. I'm saying go right after the bully first.
Yeah. Yeah.
So people in almost every church, they know who the bully is, if there is one.
Right.
And I'm saying when I find out who that person is, if something happens, I'm going to talk to that guy.
Yeah.
And hopefully he'll repent. If he doesn't, we'll ask him to leave. And either way, word gets out. Right? Word gets out, hey, that's not tolerable around here anymore.
Well, it's anti-biblical too. I mean, it's like you said. I mean, I think that's a very responsible way to approach it is to tell them, hey, man, you can't do that anymore. I mean, and divisiveness is crushing to a church, and the Bible's really strong about people pitting each other against each other. I mean, you think we talk about divisiveness. What are the motives? And, you know, we know that Jesus, whenever he answered any question, he always addressed the motive within the question as well. And when you were talking about that, I remembered when people gossip about other people. And I remember at Ohio Christian University, we had to examine case studies of real situations. And one of them that we had to examine was a pastor and an associate pastor. And the associate pastor... the pastor told the associate pastor, you know, years ago I had an affair with so-and-so in our church, and that's why they ended up leaving the church, and it crushed me, and it was terrible, and he told him this. So then the associate pastor goes to the elders, the board, and he tells them, listen, our pastor did this. And so they've got this information. They have to figure out what to do. Okay, so in class, they didn't give us the full thing. They gave us that up to there, and it ended. They said, what should the church do with the pastor now? And so we're all trying to figure out, well, what do you do? And then they give us the answer, what the church board did. And what they did was they fired the associate pastor. And they said, their reasoning was, they said, when the pastor told you that, it was in privacy and it should have been considered an act of confession. It happened a long time ago. He took care of it. And they disciplined the pastor. They brought him to the board. They disciplined him they didn't tell us how they disciplined him. They said they want him to prove that he told his wife that she knows, to bring them to them, and they want to know what he did to squelch the problem and repent, and he kept his job. But they disciplined him and fired the associate pastor. They said his motivation was not biblical, was not from the heart of a Christian, and it should have been considered a private matter, an act of confession and need of support. And I was like, we were all surprised, but then when it was explained, I thought, man, that's true. Look at the motive.
Right.
Absolutely.
I mean, the motive was for him to get the lead pastor's job.
Right.
And I think it was a little obvious. And I thought, if that case taught me more about motive, divisiveness, and a Christian heart than a lot of things in life. And I thought, man, that's a powerful story, and it's a true story.
Sure. Well, it's really interesting when you look at Titus chapter 3. It says, you warn a divisive person once, warn him a second time, then have nothing to do with him.
Yeah, that's in my sermon this week.
That's a pretty, I mean, think about that. Like 3 strikes and you're out. That's what it says.
That's funny, man. It's in my sermon this week. I'm talking about that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And churches don't do that. And we don't do that in relationship.
Yeah.
If you have a divisive person that is in your circle of friends, that's going to be a tough person to be around.
Yep.
And you think, oh, they never talk about me. Oh, they do.
They do.
They just don't talk about you in front of you.
They do. In addiction ministry, one of my friends is a psychologist who spoke at a couple events for us. I had lunch with her before she spoke to see what she was going to talk about. And one of the things that came up was neurological issues. And she said, drama. Did you know drama is an addiction? And I said, no. And she said, we were talking about people who were gossipy and divisive, and she said, yeah. She was, and then she went into the egghead talk that I can't remember all right now about how your brain gets addicted to certain neurons firing and all this stuff. And she goes, some people, if it's not there, that feeling, they need that neurological rush, so they'll create it. She said, here, let me paint a picture for you. Have you ever been in a situation where maybe you go to a party or a gathering or something like that, and somebody comes up to you and goes, hey, they'll start talking, they go, so-and-so said something about you, and I'm only telling you because I care about you and I think you're a good person. I just think you should know. I don't want to cause any trouble, but I just think you deserve to know because you're good. You just don't deserve that. I don't want to create an issue or anything like that. But she goes, have you ever heard people say stuff like that? And I said, yeah, we've all heard people say stuff like that. She goes, that's the person that shows up and says, there's no drama going on. I'll fix that. There needs to be. And she said they get addicted to this. She goes, there's people who get addicted to it to ridiculous levels. And, we meet these people. We know these people. And she said, so it has to be recognized as something that has to be dealt with very seriously. Like, hey, you do have a problem. You have to understand it's a problem. It's not just the world against you. And now let me help you with your problem. And she spoke about that. And I thought, man, I didn't know that people could be addicted to drama. But it makes total sense. We've all known someone like that, right?
Did you know that in some circles that is called mother-in-law syndrome?
I did not know. My mother-in-law, my mother-in-law loves me. So, she's not here anymore.
Which, is an amazing thing.
I never had a bad mother-in-law experience, but so I hear the mother-in-law jokes don't really resonate with me, but I see them with other people. I did not know it was called that.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah, I learned that at Penn State in psych class. It's called mother-in-law syndrome.
The name of it. There's a lot of name, like I remember in psychology class when our teacher brought up, she said, penis envy. And I went, oh. And she goes, no, it's a real thing. and I go, yeah, I know. And she goes, no, that's not what it is. Yeah. And she goes, it's not the way you use it in 8th grade. Yeah. That's not what it means. Yeah. And then she went into the whole thing, and I was like, okay, so now I can say that, and I'm just being a smart person.
I'm being intellectual.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah, I can talk like a 4th grader and giggle. No, I didn't mean to go off on a witless jag there, but no, I didn't know it was called mother-in-law syndrome. Mm-hmm. We see back to on topic. Well, we're still on topic, but divisiveness. So, in churches, I think the drama addict is one of the deadliest poisons.
Absolutely. Yeah. And in your story, the difficulty with that is the person that took the information and said, hey, did you know that this person, they went to the wrong person.
Exactly. Exactly.
Right.
No, you go back to the person that said that,
Yes.
and you confront them. If they said something about me and I don't know it, I don't need to know that they said that.
Right.
Now, if they're going to firebomb my house tonight, I'd like to know that ahead of time, right?
Yeah.
But I don't need to know that, they said that you blah, 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 blah. That doesn't help me at all. What do I do with that information? Because they always say, no, don't say anything.
Yeah, exactly. Or I'm just saying they paint themselves out as the hero. I'm just saying this because I care about you.
Yeah.
You deserve to know. Sure. And I just don't think it's fair that and
See, it's gossip, and I think we have a bad definition of gossip, because gossip could be sharing something that's true, but you're sharing it with the wrong person.
yeah, yeah,
It's not going to aid them in a positive way.
right. Yeah, man, it's a tough thing, and I've not experienced anyone here like that. And in my previous church, I was fortunate enough not to experience anyone like that, which is good because that means the body of Christ and fellowship is working. But I know in our personal lives, we all have come across people like that. And it reinforces the idea that, look, man, I think if you go to church and you get around and you have fellowship and you get around other Christians, I think you're gonna see something start to change in your life, and it's gonna get better. And it's we know it's the Holy Spirit's God, but convincing people of this is the other tough thing. That's another thing too. When you devise sermons, like when I devise sermon, there's things that I try to take into consideration. I want to talk to the person who doesn't know the Bible at all. And I don't want to insult the intelligence of the person who knows the Bible better than me.
Right.
And I want to make it accessible for everyone and cover those two topics. What's your approach?
Well, I recognize that there's the biblical world here.
Right.
This is what the scriptures say. I have to understand that. I also have to understand the world that the people live in that I'm going to communicate it to.
Right.
And I've got to marry those two things somehow.
Yep.
And I view it as going shopping in the grocery store. I have to put some of the cookies on the low shelf. I have to put some meat and potatoes here. And then I got to put some steak up here. And preaching, as you know, it's an art.
Yeah.
It's not easy. Right? So I've got to study well, I've got to understand my audience, and I've got to present the talk in such a way that people, quote unquote, get it. I listen to a lot of sermons. I've given a lot of sermons. And some sermons you're going, what was the point?
Yeah.
Why did I need to hear that?
Yeah.
I just talked to a guy who told me that in his church, fairly large church, Midwest, his lead pastor preached for like over a year on the book of Hebrews. And I'm going, and I know the scriptures are all inspired. I get that. But I'll summarize the book of Hebrews for you. Jesus is better than anyone. That's the book of Hebrews.
The whole thing.
Right? So if you're going to take 52 weeks, after a while, people are going to zone out. So you have to know where your people are. And I rotate back and forth between what I would call a horizontal theme that I'm going to do a series on a horizontal theme. In other words, it's going to be issues that you and I face with other people.
Right.
It's about me. And then I'm going to do some vertical stuff about your relationship with God. And we're going to go back and forth. Some of those series are more attractional to unchurched people.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like nobody in this area woke up this morning, or few, if any people, woke up this morning thinking, an unchurched person woke up thinking, I got to investigate Jesus. I don't think people woke up thinking that.
No,
right?
right.
But they did wake up thinking, I got an issue in my life. They woke up thinking, I really could use some friends who would love me for who I am. Well, you know where you can find those two things? A church.
Yeah.
Right? Those are really the side doors into the church. And so I'm going to try to preach to that. Now, I'm not just going to give you pixie dust principles so that you can have a happy-go-lucky life, because ultimately I'm going to give you principles, but the bottom line is unless you rely upon God to work in your life, you can't pull it off.
Right.
So that's the balance.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure that when you get to the end of the sermon, and pastors are terrible closers. You know why that is? We have too much content, and by the time we get to the end, we're going, oh my word, I'm on minute 42, and I still have 2 points. And then they try to throw it in there real fast, and nobody really understood it. And then we go, okay, good luck, go try to do that. And we don't wrap the deal. Mm-hmm. We have got to, the most important part of the sermon is not the introduction, it's not the content section, it's the end, it's the close, mm-hmm. where you're saying, okay, now what are you going to do with this? Mm-hmm. And so that's why probably, 8 or 9 years ago, I just changed the way I close all my sermons. That I'm always going to take 4 or 5 minutes at the end and say, hey, would you pray with me? Just get an attitude of prayer, and I'm just going to talk to you, and I'm going to ask that you take these thoughts before God. Mm-hmm. So I just spoke last week on living a satisfying life. Hey, would you take this right now? Would you say to God, would you help me to understand on a 1 to 10 where I am as far as living a satisfied life? Mm-hmm. And then you just pause. Mm-hmm. You let people think and process. Yeah. And then you come back, hey, if you scored yourself pretty low, would you be courageous enough today to say, God, I'm going to live life your way. I'm going to realize you're the master, I'm the follower. Would you be bold enough to do that? And you walk them through that. And every week it's different, but I think that close is really important because I honestly picture myself as a car salesman. And not a used car salesman, okay, because they're sort of shysters, right? At least that's the stereotype. But, if Drew, if you and Grace came into my car lot and you looked around at cars and I said, hey, what kind of car are you looking for? And you told me this, and this, and I showed you the car. I even said, hey, do you want to take it for a spin? You took it for a spin, and you come back, and I just go, so it's just really been good to have you here. Thanks for coming. You'd look at me like, what? Right. There's no close, right? Right? Like, it's my job to sell the car. Now, I'm not saying Jesus is a car. So
no, I know.
It breaks down. But it's my job to help people understand I got to do something with this.
Sure.
And honestly, I grew up in a church where you didn't have to do anything with anything you heard on Sunday morning because the stuff you heard on Sunday morning, you're going, I don't know what I'd ever do with that. It wasn't practical at all. I'm going to argue the Bible's a super practical book.
But do you think it's because people need the He-Man moment at the end of He-Man or at the end of Rocky and Bullwinkle or at the end of Captain Planet? They told you what the moral of the story was, whether you realized it or not. Do you think people need that obvious, hey, this is what I meant?
They do. Here's why. It's rule number 7. Now, when I say rule number 7, people always ask me, then what are the first 6? There aren't the first 6. It's just rule number 7. Here's rule number 7. It sounds crass, but it's true. Rule number 7, people are dumber than you think.
Yeah.
It's true, including me. Like, I need somebody to baby step me along and go, what are you going to do about that?
And that's what I try to do in my sermons. When I say for the people who don't understand it, because I still learn. You still learn. Mm-hmm. We still learn. The Bible's a constant. It speaks. It doesn't stop. It doesn't say that's everything I have to say today. Right. It keeps talking. It's a book that when you read it, it reads you. So you're right, and we are, and I'm emphasizing your point about including yourself because people need to understand that we strongly include ourselves in that because we're not raising ourselves above them. It's like we do have to summarize it so people go, oh, I get it, because I need someone to do that with me too. I'll listen to a sermon, it's great, and then at the end, during the wrap up, the pastor will say something. I'll go, oh my gosh, I didn't even make that connection the whole time he was talking.
Exactly.
And I've had people say that to me. They go, I never thought about that before. Right. Mm-hmm. And I go, well, and for me, it's exciting because I was like, I just discovered it when I was researching the sermon myself.
Right.
And so for me, it's exciting. But yeah, you're right. They do.
I think people get lost.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
We live in a culture that's a 7-minute culture. If you watch TV, there's a commercial. You get a break every 7 minutes. That's not so when you're preaching.
It also answers the question you said. Like when you do get to that point where you're like, what good does this do me? Mm-hmm. It's they need to know here, and here's why. And now I have heard sermons, but this is I don't know. I think some pastor nerds will agree with this, but overall pastors will probably say that's a no-no. But there are some sermons I've heard that were strictly just for educational purposes. They didn't really have a closer that had a lot of life application. The application was me learning something and about the Bible. And I understand my philosophy as a pastor is I try not to do that in the pulpit, because for me that's a Bible study class.
Right.
And if you're going to have a Bible study class, that's how you educate people with the Bible. But when you take that to the pulpit, people end up, like you said, with question marks. Well, I mean, how does this help me, man?
Well, I think that's one of the primary differences between teaching and preaching.
Yeah, it is.
All right. Teaching is going to be somewhat content driven with some application.
Right.
But when you're preaching, it's content and a whole lot of application.
Yeah.
It's a balance.
Yep, big time. Well, let's see. We got a few minutes left. I'm trying to see. Is there anything on the list that jumps off at you, Ed? That you want to cover? Like, oh, that's a sensitive.
Oh, I could take you pick one. We'll dive in.
Okay. Man, some of these we've already touched on. Oh, this is a fun one. How should churches deal with holidays with pagan roots and celebrations with symbolisms not found in Scripture? Halloween, the Easter Bunny, Santa Claus, etc. I'll tell you. Well, I'll let you. You're the guest, so I'll let you talk, and then I'll chime in afterwards.
Yeah, that's a great question. Mm-hmm. I think we need to use those events.
Yeah.
For instance, Carol and I, my wife and I, Halloween is one of our favorite holidays.
Okay.
Not because we dress up, but we know we live in a little subdivision. There's probably 90 homes in our area. Little kids come around and go trick or treating, and their parents come with them. Right?
Yeah.
So what we do every Halloween, every trick-or-treat night, we get the grill, put it out there, we make hot apple cider, and we buy like 12 dozen donuts. And we're known as the Donut House.
I'm going to your house.
Yeah. And here's why we do that. People stop and talk to us then.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And then we say, hey, and we always give them out little invite cards to the church with a pen and say, hey, you might be interested in this. Boom. We don't slam people, hey, come to my church.
Right.
None of that. But we're super friendly, and people just think it's the best thing in the world. Mm-hmm. So we're using a holiday that's recognized by our culture, and I don't think the average little kid that's going around thinks about witches and demons. They think about candy.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's about the candy.
It's about the candy.
Yeah, absolutely. Christmas. I love Christmas. Christmas Eve, my favorite time in church. Here's what I know about Christmas Eve. More people will come to church on Christmas Eve. More unchurched people will come to church on Christmas Eve than any other time.
Yep.
The church that I have the privilege of leading, we have a partnership with a community center in the area that does a Christmas tree lighting in the town square, and they have a Santa there. And so you know what we do? We provide 2 elves, and we take pictures.
Yeah.
And we give invite cards out to the Christmas Eve service.
Mm-hmm.
We're using something that's a neutral, and we're making it a positive.
That's great.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the folks we talked about earlier, the divisive stuff, or and legalists as well. I'm of your school of thought. I have a couple of things I won't do, but. I heard somebody one time, there's all these legalistic Christians that want to attack other Christians, and they use the roots of the holiday, and that's why I put that in there. Mm-hmm. It was a Christian lady. Oh, sorry, there's a tiny little spider there, and that's Satan created those that you have to die. He was slamming this Christian church because this lady was giving a yoga class. And I just thought yoga was exercise. And so he went into this long rant. Well, do you know the roots of yoga? And I'm like, these ladies are not going in and worshiping Hindu gods. They're going in and trying to get in shape. And a church had an Easter egg hunt that I was a part of before. And somebody said, that's a pagan thing, and that's fertility, and it's all blah, 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 blah. And I said, listen, when we come in here on Sunday, we talk about he is risen indeed. These kids know plastic eggs, and we keep their attention for a while. If you got a problem with that, I'm sorry. It's a cultural thing we do. We don't teach paganism. I go, we're we're not observing paganism. I said, now, when I said I had a problem with one thing, I don't want to put eggs on church literature. I said, I just don't want the colored eggs and all that stuff on the literature because and that's not because I'm some theological wacko. It's just, for me, it just feels weird to see the egg next to the cross and all that. That's just a me thing. And when it comes to Halloween and people say, oh, it's death, it's All Hallows Eve, it's all this, I go, it's kids getting dressed up for candy. I go, listen, when is the last time, and that type of legalism, I know I sound like I'm on a soapbox. When I talk to kids about Christmas and Santa Claus and stuff and myths and all this, I explain, well, we're not commanded to celebrate Christmas. We do it because of the gift that God gave us through Christ. So we celebrate that by giving gifts to each other, to show what God did for us by spreading love, by giving gifts to other people. And it's like you said, use cultural events to your advantage. And I really get irritated when people accuse the church at large of you're participating in and observing pagan and heathen holidays and the roots and all this stuff. And I'm like, not one person that comes in this church cares about, knows the roots, or is paying homage to these things.
Because why are we doing those things? That's the core. And the reason we do those things is we're trying to help unchurched people ultimately understand who Jesus really is.
But there's a bunch of people who think we're heretics because of this attitude.
And I'm fine with that.
I am too.
And I just want to ask that person, so can you tell me when is the last time you led one of your friends to know Jesus? Mm-hmm. And
right.
The answer is usually because they're so interested in being right. Rather than carrying out the mandates of Scripture that, look, I just happen to be a beggar who's found a place where to go get bread, and I'm helping other people find the bread.
Right.
That's all.
My sermon this week is on, it's weird, it's kind of a harsh title, false prophets, hypocrites, and bad teachers. And it's a heavy theme on it is Christians who attack other Christians and divisiveness. And now false prophets, that's a whole, I'm not going to get into that in the podcast. We know what that means, but that'll take too long to get into right now. But there's a big chunk of it that addresses these people with this divisive attitude that want to go out and throw stones and separate and attack and use legalism. And my question is always the same thing. Why? Because there's guys that have videos that all they do is show clips from other pastors, which are edited pastors.
Right.
And I think to myself, are you using any of your time and resources to bring people to Christ, or are you just coming out here and throwing stones at other people? There are a ton of pastors that theologically I disagree with, but I don't attack them because the worst is some of them are financially successful, and I think to myself, I see people attacking them like, dude has written 27 books. He doesn't take a salary from his church. He's 82 years old and he's worked his tail off earning a good living, and you're saying, dude, just stop. Mm-hmm. I mean, just get off his back. And I'm thinking, there's people I don't agree with, but I would never go to the pulpit and start putting pictures up and go, heretic,
right.
heretic.
Exactly.
What does that say about me as a Christian?
And what does it do? What positive comes out of that?
Nothing.
So take your time and invest in things that ultimately really matter.
Exactly. And that's the point that I'm making. So how much time we got left here?
58.
Oh, okay. So we got a couple seconds. Let's see if we can have some more fun. Oh, yeah. No.
And I have to tell you, I don't remember if you were here. You weren't here yet.
Yeah.
When we were in that in-between phase, we did the Christmas service, and on the advertising for it, because I did the ads, it was the Grinch.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you how many people came that I know who are not members of this church, brought their kids.
Absolutely.
Because the kids saw the Grinch.
Yep. Right.
Oh, so it's not going to be like the boring Christmas service where everybody just sings, lights the candles and stuff. It's going to be the Grinch. Let's go.
Exactly. And
it got them in the door.
And there's great principles in the story of the Grinch.
Oh, yeah, there is. There's a lot of Christian themes. And
Absolutely.
There's a lot of Christian themes to be found in a lot of things that people overlook. Here's a fun one. I'm going to answer this first because I think your answer is going to be probably the same. How to approach sensitive topics, abortion, homosexuality, living together out of wedlock. When I came here and had to be interviewed, someone asked me, a gay person asked me, well, where do you stand on that? And And the first thing I did was I said, I've never told anyone this, but I'm going to bring it up now. My daughter came out of the closet to me a couple of years ago, and I'm a pastor. So we started to go into that. So when these topics come up, the philosophy I have is, and this is how I answered that question. I said, my role as a pastor is not to be a travel agent for guilt trips. My role as a pastor is to see you lock hands with Jesus Christ. I go, the moral directions and the internal struggles and the question marks in your mind, if you hold his hand as you navigate these roads that I want to hold your other hand as we go down, you will understand things you didn't understand before. You'll see directions you want to go that previously you didn't want to go. We'll get there together, but my job is to make sure your hand is firmly locked with his, not to sit you down and tell you everything that is wrong with you and what kind of a scumbag sinner you are, because everybody in the room is a scumbag sinner. Everybody is just on a different sin.
And that's the key.
Yeah.
Right? That's the key. And what Christians do is they pick out the top big five that they're not doing.
And they go after other people.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
they want to go, oh, you. And apparently it makes them feel better. Totally wrong thinking.
Big time.
So, no matter, think of the most heinous, ungodly person you know. God loves that person as much as he loves the three of us. Mm-hmm. And so we have to be communicators of truth with love.
Yep.
And it's not very easy to do. And you get called a bigot in our culture today because you think this, that, and the other thing. And I'm saying, look, I'm going to choose to allow God to speak for himself. I'm just a delivery person. That's all I am. Mm-hmm. And if you're involved in any one of those things, then I want to help you. And I'll help you to understand who God is, what he wants to do in your life. And then the question comes back to go, well, do I have to stop doing that? Well, here's the thing. Figure out who Jesus is, follow him, he'll tap you on the shoulder. Mm-hmm. And if he wants you to stop doing that, he's going to tap you on the shoulder.
Yeah.
Stop doing that.
Mm-hmm. And that's why I tell people, your lens, your worldview, your paradigm shifts, everything changes. So if I sat down and I told you everything you're doing wrong in your life, then everyone in this room would have to get in line to hear the same thing, because there's no one would qualify for perfection. And, if you want me to set you down and say, okay, tell me everything you do, this is right, this is wrong, this is right, this is wrong, coming from me, it may be a little offensive, but coming from God himself, you're more apt to
because
get into a relationship.
Here's the scorecard at the end of the day.
Yeah.
None of us make the mark.
Right.
None of us.
Right.
So we're all in the same boat.
Yep.
And God's principles weren't given to hinder your life, to keep you from enjoying life, to keep you from having fun. They were given to protect you.
To protect you. When God says, thou shalt, he is saying, I want you to be happy. And when he's saying, thou shalt not, he is saying, I want you to be safe. Mm-hmm. And that's that. I tell everyone constantly, that's the way you should look at that. It's not that God doesn't want you to have any fun. God does want you to have fun. He wants you to have an awesome life. But he wants you to do it safely within the boundaries of understanding of, here's how you do this. You want to get the most out of it? Here's the best way to get the most out of it. That's what he's telling you to do. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, I guess we're getting what time? I see. There's the clock right there. I should just start looking over there. Mm-hmm. So okay, what are your? We're not in a hurry. You don't have like 30 seconds. But what are your parting thoughts on today's topics, or just in your heart about church behind the scenes overall? Some closing comments.
Well, I really wish that everybody that comes to church would be able to discover who Jesus really is, and that they would change in their character and their priorities, because if those things are true, then they're going to impact people who don't know Jesus, and then they're going to come to church. Same thing's going to happen, and then they're going to impact their friends, and then they're going to come to church. And it's God's plan that we keep giving the good news out.
Yep.
But the church tends to say, let's keep it in here. Mm-hmm. Let's keep the good news. It's for us. It's a Christian club. Mm-hmm. It's not.
Right.
It's not. The doors are always open. And not only are the doors always open, but we have a responsibility. Those of us who are Christ followers, we have a responsibility to go out and tell other people. And I'm not talking about being a street preacher. I'm talking about invest your life in people that are in your sphere of influence.
Yep.
Does it make any sense to be a street preacher and go scream at cars as they're driving by, telling them they're going to hell? That doesn't make any sense. Why don't you just put some love on your neighbor who might really be a messed up person and just love them for who they are and love them enough until they go, Ed, why are you doing this?
Exactly.
Why? And they will say that one way or another. And then you get to talk to them about who Jesus really is. And if we do that, God is going to do some amazing things, which is why I love this church.
Yeah.
Whenever I'm with you, whenever I'm with the folks of Grace Fellowship, there is something here because every person knows, hey, we're not perfect. Every person knows, hey, we've been given an agenda by God to get the good news out. And we're going to do that, and we're going to invest our time. We're going to invest our resources because at the end of the day, it really matters.
Yeah, it does.
It's not a club.
That's right. And you're right. This is an awesome church. And the folks here are like that. So, all right. Well, Ed, I love you, and I'm grateful for all you've done for me personally and this church, and for the folks watching that go to church here that don't. Ed has been very instrumental on taking a huge part of working with the church to keep it going when there was no pastor, and to finding a pastor, and continues to meet, consult, teach, and talk with us. We're grateful for that, and I'm grateful. Jackie and I were happy you're here today, man. Thanks for shedding some light.
It's been a joy to be with you.
So
thank you.
Hopefully we'll do it again. So for sure. Well, we will. Sunday. Thanks, Ed.
Loved it, man.